I hate to interrupt all these great conversations that have been eavesdropping on, but we do have to get started here eventually. All right, welcome everybody to the Economy for All Town Hall. Thanks so much for coming out. This event is hosted by the Rights and Democracy Education Fund. It's part of a series of town halls moderated by Vermont Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman. And tonight's events are also sponsored by the Rights and Democracy Project, Vermont NEA, Planned Parenthood, Vermont Action Fund, Vermont Interfaith Council. I'm sure I forgot one or two. RAD Bennington, Rights and Democracy Bennington, meets every first and third Wednesday of the month, right across the street here at the church over in their fellowship hall, except for this coming Wednesday, when we will be standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from the Bennington College Student Union and Bennington College SIEU Local 200 United. These are basically the kitchen workers, janitorial staff, etc. at Bennington College, as they try to negotiate a fair contract with the college. They're holding a town hall Wednesday evening, 7 to 9 at FAPA on the Bennington College campus. It's the big gray building. Our own Kaya Morris will be speaking there, and I hope everybody can make it out. I'm Tom Haley. I've been with Rights and Democracy Bennington probably since it was founded. I was born and raised here in town to a fairly politically active family. Went to high school here. I was the liberal guy in all your classes. Then as life moved along, one day I was walking down the street here in Main Street during Midnight Madness, and I heard out of nowhere, "Hey you, excuse me, are you registered to vote?" And I went over, and this gentleman who was running for his first time, running for Congress, had a TV tray set up in the middle of the street, registered me to vote. I voted for him every chance I had to since then. And then life, just kept going, and I got less and less active as it went. But then that same gentleman ran for president, and he told us all that if this political revolution that he was trying to start was to take place, that we all had to get active. And I really took that to heart, so I found RAD. We started really working hard, pushing our legislators, contacting them. You look on your seats as you came in, you should have all gotten contact information for all of our representatives in Congress, Governor Douglas, and every Bennington County legislator. I encourage you to use that information. Anything comes up, they love to hear from you, they love feedback. If you see a bill you want them to vote for, call them up and tell them so. If you see a bill you don't want them to vote for, tell them that too. And especially if you think they're doing a good job, call them up and tell them that. Tonight we're going to have a discussion about many of the struggles thousands of families in our communities are facing right now, and most importantly, steps we can take to move us toward an economy that truly works for all of us. At Rights and Democracy, we believe that we must do better to ensure that public policies are in place to ensure that every single person in our communities has the ability to lead lives in dignity, where we can all have a chance to be happy and healthy, where we can all thrive. There are a lot of things about our communities and our country, but if we take a step back and see how our economy, we see that we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and with incredible technological growth. But then we see the extreme levels of inequality, with millions of people working full-time and even 2 or 3 jobs, but they're still living in poverty. We see that despite spending more than twice as much per person on health care, that millions of people are going without. We see the life expectancy of men and women in our country declining. Our communities facing an an opioid and drug overdose crisis. We see our communities in crisis and people pitted against each other by race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability, and age. And historically marginalized communities are facing systems of oppression that need to be dismantled. And ultimately, we also see and hear our scientists detailing how our economy and energy systems are destroying the very life support systems on our beautiful planet. We believe that we can have an economy that works for all of us, that's in harmony with the planet and all the other living things who live here with us. We know that here in Vermont, we can lead the way. So our state is one of the first states to head down the path in the direction our country needs to go, advancing human rights and building a real democracy where we have a universal healthcare system and invest in the health of our communities. Excuse me. Where we advance a Green Mountain New Deal to invest in renewable energy, clean water, and public transit systems, creating jobs and making sure that all workers get paid a livable wage, and we support strong local economies. It's not going to be easy. All of us have to play our part, and together we can make it happen. So thanks again for coming out this afternoon. Please give a warm welcome to thank tonight's moderator, Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, for participating in this town hall series and sharing our vision of an economy that works for all of us.
Really well opened, thank you. It's funny because you told your story about that gruff-voiced gentleman getting you interested and even registered to vote many years ago. And I was a UVM student back in 1992, and I was pretty cynical about the two-party structure, corporate money and politics. I thought I'd just stay as an activist outside the system, working with different groups to make changes at UVM or changes in the community. And it was then Congressman Bernie Sanders who I saw speak, and I thought, oh my goodness, he's independent of corporate money. He's talking issues that I care about. Even then, environmental issues were being talked about, workers' rights, an economy that works for all. And I looked and thought, wow, you can engage in the political system. You can run for office. You can serve in office, and you can maintain your integrity. You can speak your mind. You don't have to mince your words like most politicians that I pictured, particularly at the national level. And so he inspired me much the same way. So I volunteered for him. We registered over about 1,000 students to vote that year in the fall of '92. And then I started helping other folks locally running for office in the Burlington area. And it was in about 1994, that summer, I was working on a farm in South Hero between semesters at school. And they asked me to run for the state legislature, which I lost by 59 votes the first time out in '94, and then I won in '96, and certainly never expected to be standing before the wonderful folks of Bennington and Bennington County. Back then, as a third-party legislator from the University part of Burlington, one of 3 members of the Progressive Party, shouting ideas to the wind that were not really where the legislature was yet at that time, and oddly enough, 23 years later, here I am. So I think, fortunately, these issues are growing more and more. I don't know that they ever weren't there, but I think the idea of the population and the masses and everybody going, oh, this is possible, has become more of a reality. I think plenty of people wanted an economy for all, have thought about how the economy was slipping away, although at that point we were only about 15 years into the Reaganomics mindset, which if you really look at an economy for all and where we fundamentally started veering off course, it's never been exactly an economy for all anyway, but Reaganomics really set us on this path to this situation we're in now, where the majority of people really are struggling to make ends meet. You've got the whole conversation going where younger people are, for the first time going to be a generation that makes less than their parents on average. Yesterday I saw Representative Cornelia Jolly-Paul speak up in Burlington, and she was talking about how, in terms of healthcare, we're the only industrialized nation where our average life expectancy is going down, whereas every other industrialized nation, their life expectancies are going up. So this sort of dollar sort of greed mentality that everything rests with the mighty dollar and nothing rests with community and family and that outside of work mentality since Reaganomics it really has set us, frankly, on a fairly detrimental path with our wealth disparity greater than at any time since the 20s. And I think we're pretty aware of what happened in the late 20s, and we came pretty close about 10 years ago, but for some pretty major economic stimulus at the federal level, I think, and I think even the folks pulling the strings weren't sure it was going to get us out of the nosedive. It got us out of the nosedive, but it really hasn't set us back on a path of economic prosperity for everyday working people. So this town hall series is traveling around the state to talk about some of these issues. There are limits on a state level sometimes of how many strings you can pull and ways you can change things, but I think we're still a long way from reaching some of those limits. And I think the legislators that we have today with us are doing great work trying to move us in a better direction. We are still uphill a little bit with some of the positions that the governor has taken. I'm sure we'll be talking about minimum wage today, paid family leave. We can talk some about health care, talk about whatever's on your minds, and climate change as well. And I think some of the discussion that we have coming forward will also come from the questions you have with respect to what we're doing. Is it enough? Can we do more? Or is it enough? What are the ideas that you have? What are some of the reflections that our legislators and guests have who are co-sponsoring these events in terms of progress we are making? Because we really have an opportunity here in Vermont that most other citizens and states don't have. The 2018 election was wonderful, frankly, for Vermont. We didn't quite win the governor's office. I wish we had. But as a whole, the legislature clearly, we elected more folks. The population of the state said what happened the last 2 years was not what we want. And we now have supermajorities in the House and Senate. Frankly, in the Senate, we gained a seat in Rutland County. So anybody who pays attention to politics, the fact that a Republican is not representing Rutland County is pretty remarkable. We had Senator Karras a while back, but as a whole, it's not the norm. And in the House, we gained a number of seats in districts that were close, and folks that thought some districts were going to be close weren't that close. I think about, well, right, you were a new candidate, so we won some seats, but also I was thinking about a representative in Johnson or Hardwick area, Rep. Chip Triano, who had voted for some of the gun legislation, and everyone thought, well, that's a pretty rural part of Memorial County, Caledonia County. That's going to be tough for him, and he won 54 to 46. So it wasn't the 20 vote or 70, 60 vote margin people thought. And the reason I think we have the greatest opportunity, the most good, in all of the 24, 23 years since I was first elected, is that 2020 is not going to set us back electorally. Right? If we had an increase in turnout in 2018, and it helped protect many people and propel others new into office, 2020 is going to be that on steroids. Folks that come out to vote in 2020 in the presidential race that might not otherwise vote, they come out every 4 years, and they're coming out in Vermont in the least Trump supportive state in the nation. Right? Those folks aren't going to go, I'm going to vote against Trump, and for whichever of the great options we have coming up. I happen to support Bernie, but there's a number of great candidates, and so I'm going to happily support whoever wins the nomination. But they're not going to down ticket go, oh, I don't really know much what's going on, but I'm against Trump, but I think I'll go Republican in the House or the Senate. It might happen some, but I think on the 50-50 scale, it's more like 60-40 or 70-30 in our direction. So why not now be as bold as we can possibly be this year and next year in the legislature? If there's ever a time you're not going to get booted for being bold. And I'm going to wrap and then get to our guest speakers in a moment here. Even if some of us were to lose because we were bold, I'm going to tell a brief story from 19 years ago. I was a fairly new legislator, and we passed a law called civil unions. Those of you who have lived in Vermont that long, you'll know that was one of the hardest laws to ever pass. It was a very emotional time on all sides. Love, hate, anger, excitement, and I've never seen the State House, ever since. Even the gun stuff last year was a much shorter window of intensity compared to those many, many months. And we had ballpark 15 legislators vote for civil unions who lost their seats. And if you ever want to talk about who the champions are for marriage equality, it's those 15 people. Because they're the ones that voted for it knowing they were going to lose. And last night I was sitting next to Floyd Neese, who was the majority leader during marriage equality, who helped get that 100th vote for marriage equality over the governor's veto. And he whispered to me, he said, you know, Michael Obahowski told him something when he first got there as a legislator. He said, the first thing you have to figure out as a legislator is, what are you willing to lose for? Now, Obi was the speaker when I first got there, and I always knew I liked him, but I hadn't heard that one, and I like him even more now. What are you willing to lose for? Why are we there as elected folks? If not to push for the change we want to see, obviously to represent our districts, but hopefully if we've run with the ideas clearly as we're running, then you can fight for those ideas when you're down there. And if in the end you're willing to lose for something because it's the right thing to do, and you're willing to lose for that to enshrine that in our laws, which in that particular instance led to marriage. We were the first state with civil unions through legislature, first state through marriage through legislative process, and a handful of years later it became the law of the land through the Supreme Court. Those 15 people lost for that. And if you ask a single one of them today, do you wish you voted the other way so that you could have stayed there to work on another issue for another couple of years? Or do you lay your head down at night every night, resting easy and sleeping solid? I'm pretty sure not a one would say, oh, you know, I really, in hindsight, wish I voted the other way. And if we think about where we are with our economy right now, and where we are with climate change right now, and where we are on the assault on women's rights right now, I think it's our time to not only vote for one, but vote for 2 or 3 or 5 issues that we're willing to lose our seat over. And the amazing thing is, we're not even at the same kind of risk of losing our seats. I mean, that's what's remarkable. That's why the opportunity is so great right now. And so it's great to do these town halls, hear what's on your mind, encourage you to thank your legislators also for doing the good work they're doing, but also to call them and always encourage and ask, are we going as far as we can go? Is there more we can do about income inequality, health care, women's reproductive freedom, which if we get our law and our constitutional amendment passed, I think we're going to pretty much hit a grand slam. You know, these are big issues, and this is a big time. But hopefully we can address some of those. I want to, before I introduce our first speaker, also point out, interestingly enough, on this lovely sheet of contact information, one office holder who's right in front of you is not included. So that's okay, because I'm a decent self-promoter, so I brought my own business card. And it's really not about self-promotion, it's about giving you the contact information so that you can also poke or prod or ask me anything at any time. And then also I'm going to be handing out a clipboard that Peter's going to hand across, which is a sign-up list for my newsletter. I send out an electronic newsletter every couple weeks from the State House. Many of you probably already get it. But if you don't and you would like to receive it, it's paperless. The delete key works just fine, so hopefully it's not going to overload your inbox too much. It doesn't ask you for money. It just gives you a 2-pager on a different issue every couple weeks of what's happening, sometimes links to websites, sometimes information for you about something, an idea that's happening in another part of the state that you're like, oh, that could work in Bennington or whatnot. So it's an exchange of ideas as well. So I'm going to invite up Vicki Lamprun from Rights and Democracy to start us with some of this conversation.
So, as My name's Vicki Lamprin. I'm from Bennington.
Microphone.
This one?
Yeah.
Thanks. So a couple of things I'm proud to say is I am on the leadership committee with Rights and Democracy, and I'm also on the Education Fund Board with Rights and Democracy. 4 years ago, that's not where I saw myself. No kidding. I decided I was going to knock doors for Bernie, and I was terrified. And I had the best time of my life. Done deal. After that, I'm just off and going to the races. I can't believe the changes in my own life that have happened. So that's about me. I'd like to talk to you about two policies that Rights and Democracy has been working on this year. They are raising the minimum wage and paid family and medical leave. Last year, Governor Phil Scott vetoed both an increase to the minimum wage and the paid family and medical program. This year, we have the potential for veto-proof majorities in both the House and the Senate. We have the people power and the political power to pass these two policies for hardworking Vermonters this year. Wages have stalled, causing people to have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. Raising the minimum wage gives more stability to families. This will be done in 5 steps by 2024 and will give a raise to more than 50,000 Vermonters. This morning I just read it's now up to 66,000 Vermonters, especially women of color who are more likely to be working in low-paying jobs. The proposed minimum wage path, adjusting for inflation, will be 2019, $10.78 an hour, 2020, $11.50 an hour, 2021, $12.25 an hour, 2022, $13.10, 2023, $14.05, and then we finally get to 2024, where people will be making $15 an hour. Raising the wage will allow people to earn enough money to cover their basic needs, basic I said, and eliminate the burden of putting in many hours for economic safety net programs. Raising the wage in a 5-year path will give employers and small business owners time to adjust. It will allow people to put more money back into the communities that they live in. Imagine if people had more money to spend on Main Street. Paid family and medical leave benefits every working Vermonter with a small deduction from their paychecks. We will all need to take time off from work to care for a sick family member, a new family member, or your own illness. Another benefit is your job will be protected by this program. The governors of Vermont and New Hampshire have this silly dream in their head, and they want to put forth a program that is voluntary, and we all know that does not work. A mandatory paid family and medical leave act will give a much bigger pool of folks that will be able to keep the cost much lower and to make a bigger pool of monies. These two policies are huge steps to ensuring that the most vulnerable workers in Vermont will have some relief from financial stresses and allow them to be more secure in their jobs. Caring for a sick family member is very stressful, but if you know that your job will be there when you're able to return to work, imagine how much less stress will be on caregivers. We have many new legislators, so that means we need to continue working and connecting working Vermonters with their representatives. We need to keep on reaching out to low-wage earners in our communities. Rights and Democracy has a storytelling form that we can use to reach out to folks. It will help us to connect with many of our over 66,000 low-wage earners in our state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And it was nice of you to travel up to Burlington yesterday to talk about some healthcare issues with Representative Jayapal, who visited Vermont. She's from Washington State and was up in Vermont just for the day. And Vicki made the drive up, which is, you know, since you all recognize what the long drive down is, I'm going to say thank you for driving all the way up. Our next speaker is Paige Fieser, if I pronounce that right, Fieser, something like that, from Vermont Planned Parenthood, and discuss a couple issues that are critical, both economically and for women's autonomy and reproductive freedom. I was going to try to adjust it so it'd be more in front of you, but I'm not going to. Too loud.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paige Fieser. I'm the Vermont Public Affairs Organizer with Planned Parenthood Vermont Action Fund. I've been a lifelong Vermonter. I grew up in St. Albans, Vermont, and I'm now a proud resident of Winooski, Vermont. And Vicki, I really appreciated you talking about stories. Certainly through my work as an organizer, we ask our patient base many times for their stories. And it's through that storytelling effort of hearing of the struggles, as well as how thankful our patient base have been for the essential healthcare services that Vermont Planned Parenthood provides to over 19,000 Vermonters, has been an incredibly powerful experience, and that's why I'm very proud to be up here to talk to you today. I'm also very excited to talk to you all about reproductive rights, particularly from an economic context. And I think it's really important that we have this conversation, talking first about the economic impacts of reproductive rights on the individual, but also talking about what reproductive rights, the impact that it has on local economies as well as communities. And so for a childbearing individual, the ability to decide when and whether or not they're going to have children is going to be one of the most important economic decisions they're ever going to make in their lifetime. Having that control allows people to increase their own education, be able to pursue the type of career that they want, and also determining when not to have children can also ensure that they can really invest the time early in their career, in their workforce career, and therefore increase the financial conditions that if they do decide to have children, can provide the best situation for that family. As well as from a societal perspective, certainly when childbearing individuals have access, the full access to reproductive health care, including birth control and abortion care, we see increased labor force participation, individuals getting higher earnings because they're able to achieve higher careers or more advanced careers, and we're seeing a lot more diversity within advanced careers. And overall, families have better financial conditions for both their children, as well as for the adults in the family. It is important to know, especially in our modern day economy, that women make up half of the workforce and they play such a vital role in our economy's success. Now, certainly we talked a lot about the benefits of granting full reproductive rights to childbearing individuals in our communities. I think it's also really important to talk about what happens when people do not have full access to reproductive health services. Unfortunately, we live in a country, as well as on a global scale, plenty of case studies of what happens when people do not have full access to reproductive health care. And in thinking about our nation, over half of our states have some kind of abortion restriction law. In fact, since 2011, over 400 abortion restriction laws have been passed in states. Certainly, our Congress has also made annual attempts to restrict abortion access, as well as to defund Planned Parenthood, which is a misnomer. And the Trump administration has been actively working to roll back reproductive rights, certainly ranging from cutting funding to teen pregnancy prevention programs, to all the way to a domestic gag rule on Title X, America's Family Planning Program, in which providers that talk about or provide abortion care cannot provide affordable health care to people that are in most need. And in talking about that, all these rollbacks, these restrictions, these rules, they most disproportionately impact low-income and minority populations. And so when talking about that, when people do not have access to abortion care and reproductive health care, we see some really negative impacts. In fact, restricting abortion access threatens economic security for childbearing people. And many of those seeking an abortion already experience economic hardships even before they become pregnant. And if they're living in an area where they cannot access abortion care and they're forced to carry a pregnancy to full term, they have a fourfold percent increased chance of dipping below the federal poverty level and therefore becoming dependent upon government programs such as temporary assistance for needy families, food assistance, and the WIC program, just to name a few. So again, well, the other really big thing to note is that these public programs help to assist a person get by. They're not allowing people to really have a thriving situation for children and families. So it's really unfortunate that in effect, when you lack reproductive rights and you don't have access to the resources that you need, we're actually creating a kind of cyclical, looping poverty situation. And we have a real opportunity here in Vermont to kind of break that cycle of poverty. I'm really just proud and excited to live in a state like Vermont that has this current legislature that is really understanding the dangers and the attacks on reproductive health care and reproductive rights in our country. Certainly our legislature also understands that the Supreme Court is now politically stacked to overturn Roe versus Wade. And we could see Roe versus Wade being overturned as soon as this summer. So because of that, our legislature is working on two important pieces of legislation. The House in January introduced H57, an abortion rights bill. If passed, this bill would seek to codify the access that Vermonters have had for the past 46 years. And the Senate in February, as Lieutenant Governor was saying, is a reproductive liberty amendment to our Constitution. If passed, this would amend the Constitution to reflect the Vermont value that every Vermonter should be afforded personal reproductive liberty. This is such a historical moment in Vermont's history because no other state in our country has tried to amend the Constitution specifically protecting reproductive rights. This goes beyond Roe versus Wade. Certainly with Roe versus Wade, it's a question of privacy between a person and their medical provider. Vermont is saying no, reproductive rights is an important human right that needs to be enshrined within our Constitution. So, in thinking about this, our legislature is working as hard as they can to try to pass the abortion rights bill by the end of this session, especially with the threat of Roe versus Wade being overturned. The reproductive liberty amendment will take 4 years to pass. It needs to go through the House and the Senate twice, and then in 2022, the Vermont people will have a chance to vote on whether they want this in their Vermont Constitution. So we've got a really long road ahead of us. And in thinking about next steps, Planned Parenthood Vermont Action Fund is going to be working hard around the state to build support and education, not only around building reproductive rights in our state, but also helping to tackle some of those awful stigmas in our culture, especially around abortion access, but also why women's health is important to our economy, to education, to the well-being of all Vermonters. So things that you can do right now. Definitely, I want to encourage everyone before you leave. I've got a sign-up sheet. Please put your name and email address down. We've been doing lots of call to action around the abortion rights bill and the reproductive liberty amendment, and our legislators can't do this without us. I will say that over 70% of Vermonters support protecting access. But I will say that the 30% of people who do not have been incredibly loud and organized on this issue. And they are trying to intimidate our legislators from trying to do what is right. And so it's really critical that we use our power and our voice to tell them, hey, I got your back, I support you, absolutely. So we can provide you tools in order to do that. And so get on the list and definitely write to your legislators. The last thing I'll end on is this Wednesday. I know Rights and Democracy is doing work to pass fair labor situations at Bennington College. Kudos to you. I will also say that on Wednesday, we'll be going to the State House. The House will be doing a public hearing on the Reproductive Liberty Amendment, and we need to show Vermont support for this. So if you're interested and really passionate about reproductive rights, come see me. I'm happy to talk to you about it. All right, thank you so much.
I'm a procedural nut, which is probably the right thing to be when you're running the Senate, because you have to know the rules and so forth. And I'm going to give a 2-second interesting primer on amending the Constitution, which is that the Vermont Constitution is actually one of the hardest constitutions to amend, and that's actually a very good thing. You think about it, the Constitution of each state and of the country are the enshrined rights that are not to be taken away by sudden majority whims and fancies. When you have states like Colorado, where it's literally every year there's constitutional amendments changing it on the equivalent of laws, basically, by popular referendum. To amend the Constitution in Vermont, the thing I learned this year, because I always knew it was 2/3 in the Senate, the first vote, but it's actually not 2/3 as a percentage. It's actually 2/3 of the body, which is why you need to reach 20 votes, not 16 to 8, but you had to get 20 full votes. Now in the Senate, we actually got 28 votes, 28 to 2, really strong. But each of the 4 votes through the 2 Senate and the 2 House votes are all different. A 2/3 vote of the Senate, which is 20 the first time, a majority vote of the members of the House, so you need 76 votes. Again, you can't win 73 to 72, you have to have 76 votes. And then when it goes back to the Senate, it's a majority of the Senate, so we have to have 16 votes. And then when it goes to the House, it's a majority vote. So each of the 4 is a uniquely different number. Just as a curious fact for you all, but we don't get opportunities to talk about that very often, so I was going to have to. Our next guest is Leslie Jacobson, also from Rights and Democracy. We're going to be talking about healthcare, and I'm going to give you this mic while I tinker with the stand so that we can hear you, and then we'll hear others better.
Hello, I'm a member of the Bennington Rights and Democracy Healthcare Group.
Closer, please.
Should I start again? Hello, I'm a member of the Bennington Rights and Democracy Healthcare Group. We meet regularly and we're composed of approximately 9 members from our community from a variety of backgrounds, including 2 physicians, a business person, and a gardener. But no matter what our backgrounds, we have a common thread. We all have experienced the broken nature of our current healthcare system. We, or someone we know, has had to struggle with either having no insurance or inadequate insurance. We, or someone we know, has had to forego medical care or medications due to the high cost of deductibles and copays. So our group has come together with a common goal of bringing improved Medicare for all to Vermont. We want a single-payer, universal healthcare system that will cover all Vermonters. To work towards this goal, we have focused, and we will continue to focus, on educating the public about universal healthcare. We have sponsored community healthcare forums on universal healthcare, on the accountable care organization known as OneCare, which is part of an all-payer system, but not a single-payer system, and that's an important distinction. We have sponsored public and private showings of documentaries on the healthcare crisis in this country and about big pharma and how all of these affect all of us, again, as individuals and businesses. We have testified at the State House as to the need of universal health care. Our RAD healthcare group is currently in the process of meeting with all of our Bennington County legislators. We are meeting in small groups to discuss how we can work together to move forward towards universal health care here in Vermont. We hope this series of meetings in Bennington will serve as a model for communities throughout the state.
All right. See if that's working a little better for folks, and they'll be able to get it in front of their mouth a little easier. Daniel Quip from Vermont Interfaith will be speaking with us next to give us a few thoughts as well. Interfaith is a great organization across the state of many different religious organizations fighting for a lot of justice issues. So thank you. Yes.
I'm not quite as tall as you. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah, great. So my name's Daniel Quip. I live in Brattleboro, and I'm a community organizer with Vermont Interfaith Action. And some of you in this room are members of faith communities and came to my table and said, what is Vermont Interfaith Action? And that's not on you, that's on us. We are a group that works throughout the state, but have not really funded a position in southern Vermont until like a couple of months ago. So if you live in Chittenden County or you live near Barrie or Montpelier, you might know Vermont Interfaith Action. If you live down here, mostly not so much. You know, you might get an email now and then. And you know, my faith, actually I'm not a member of a faith community, but I do have faith in the power of community organizing. I've worked as an organizer with 350 Vermont, with 350.org on national campaigns. I've worked in Brattleboro with the Vermont Workers Center, and I've worked in this county and in Windham County canvassing for Let's Grow Kids to create a childcare system that works for everybody that needs it. And the reason why I'm here today is kind of twofold. You know, I wanted to meet people and actually look them in the eye and say, yes, Vermont Interfaith Action exists, and here's a pamphlet. And also, like, we're part of the coalition that's trying to raise the wage, okay? So I wear like a lot of you, some of you actually wear hats, and you know, some of us have metaphorical hats. So I do a few different things. I work for SEVCA, which is one of the community action agencies, the equivalent of Brock in this county. I do crisis fuel assistance for them. I do this community organizing work with the VIA. Before that, I've worked in a number of jobs that pay minimum wage or close to minimum wage. And I know from the daily work that I do that there are way too many Vermonters who are living in poverty, who are living like one mishap away from their whole world falling apart. So whether or not our communities can afford a minimum wage that goes up in steps, right? I think sometimes when we talk about raising the wage to $15, some people imagine, boom, it just happens like that, and maybe that won't work, right? But we have a good plan that goes up in steps by 2024 to a minimum wage, remember? Like, we're not talking like everybody should be earning minimum wage. This is for the least paid jobs, right? But everyone for doing 40 hours of labor each week, for, you know, spending that time grafting away on something that hopefully is fulfilling and, like, you know, is rich with dignity. But everyone deserves to be paid a wage that can actually keep them out of poverty. Nobody should be working a full-time job and still find themselves in poverty. So I have an accent. I don't know if if you notice. So I'm from the UK, and my experience of growing up in a single-parent, fairly low-income household in the UK was less stressful than it would be if I grew up in this country, okay? I didn't have to worry about whether or not we could afford for anybody to get sick. My mother didn't have to worry so much about being able to take time off work. I'm not saying that it was perfect or easy, but in this country, the vast majority of people live one accident, one mishap, one, terrible thing away from disaster. So in my work at SEVCA, I see people every day who are in crisis. And that's kind of exhausting. And also, we can do something about it, right? There are people in this room who, through their service, through their work, sit in the legislature. There are people in this room, through their service and work, who organize communities, right? And we as a collective can do something about our collective situation, right? We can raise the wage. We can bring about healthcare that actually is healthcare, not health insurance, right? If you have health insurance, but you cannot afford to pay the copay, you cannot afford to pay the deductible, you don't really have healthcare. You just have a little thing in your pocket, okay? And it doesn't really help. Family and medical leave will really impact lives of Vermonters in a good way. So I would encourage folks who are connected with faith communities or folks who are not connected with faith communities but are interested in working in an interfaith group to come and check out my little table. We can chat, I'll take your email address, and then our goal is to build a local organizing committee in Bennington County and one in Windham County. I'm doing much better with Windham County right now because it's easier to stay on that side of Route 9. But if I'm incentivized through exciting connections, I'd love to spend more time in Bennington County. I love Bennington County. And I think that, we're a small state, and in some ways that feels like we have these connections, right? But I also know that I cannot afford to go to the State House every week. I have to go to work. Most people who are affected by the policies that are enacted at the State House don't get to have much of a say in them. So that's where we as community organizers come in. We need to actually go to the people who are impacted by these policies and find out what's going to work for them. I heard about the RAD storytelling device. That's really important, right? We need to collect the stories of folks who are impacted by living on a minimum wage that does not lift them out of poverty, does not give them a life of dignity. So if you're interested in connecting with me, I'll be over there. We can chat some more. Thanks.
I think it'd be worth talking to just to listen to his accents. We're going to bring up our legislators next for a few brief introductory moments, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. They don't know that what order they're being called on, so someone's more nervous than the rest. But we'll start with Representative Kathleen James from Manchester. I'll invite her on up and offer a couple thoughts what committee you're on and what's going on in the House briefly, and then we'll have the other two as well.
Hello, I'm Kathleen James. I'm Kathleen James. I'm a freshman rep from Bennington 4, so I represent Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and part of Sunderland up in Montpelier, and I feel very fortunate to have been assigned to the Education Committee, so have been having a chance to work on education issues this session, and really loving the work. In addition, our time is always limited, and I really wanted to try to stay focused. So I've become very active in one caucus, that's the Climate Solutions Caucus. Climate action is an issue that I ran on and that is very close to my heart, and so I've been attending a lot of brainstorming and strategy meetings about climate action and what we can do to move that forward in a bold way in the legislature. So education and climate are at this point the areas that I'm trying to focus on and try to gain a little expertise, which is always there's always a bit of a learning curve. Otherwise than that, that's what I'm up to. I'm always really happy to hear from folks. And I guess we'll move along and introduce everybody else.
I also want to mention one thing I know Kathleen is doing, I've seen it on Facebook, is hosting coffee and sort of town halls in your district. And
Right.
that's something that more and more legislators are doing. And I think it's really great. It creates those opportunities for constituents, along with email, along with phone calls, just to go, I can go sit and have a cup of coffee or tea and have a casual conversation. And at the State House, I also have a coffee with constituents. Of course, it's at the State House, so it's hard for you to come. So we're talking about maybe trying to take it around the state some. But it's often really interesting to sit with 4 or 5 different people who come in with a range of different issues, and for each of them to hear some of the topics other people are facing. Because one of the unique opportunities we have as elected officials is to hear from a very wide range of constituents with wide-ranging concerns. Some agree, some disagree, and it brings back together that humanity of who we are in Vermont that we are, I think, collectively so sad to see not happening at some of the larger scale level in the world of politics. So it's really a great experience whether you have something to offer or talk about, or even just to sit and listen. I don't know if that's been your experience, but that's how I felt the Coffee with Constituents has been.
Yeah, it's been great. I'm doing regular coffee hours alternating between Manchester and Arlington, and I usually post those announcements. I send out a newsletter as well, so if you want to sign up, see me afterwards, and that's how I let folks know about my coffee hours.
And Representative Jim Carroll, we'll invite you up for a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll wrap after that with Senator Campion, who everybody already knows, so you don't need to introduce yourself.
Hey everybody. I'll tell you, being up in the legislature has been the greatest privilege of my life. But I gotta tell you, it ain't easy. I sit in committee and do my best to focus on a witness, and in the meantime, there are other things that I'm working on with respect to local town issues, and staying focused is really difficult. I'm on the Commerce Committee, which I really enjoy and feel like I was meant to be there. And I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday who was haranguing me about the 24-hour waiting period and the gun magazine thing. And he brought up an interesting perspective. And what he said is, this is a distraction, maybe a good idea, but we need to think globally about what's really important. And one of the things that I hear about often is healthcare. This man, who is well off, pays over $22,000 a year for himself, his wife, and his 2 boys. That's more than some people make in a year. And to add insult to injury, his deductible is $5,000 per incident. That's unsustainable. And we can't do it by myself. I'm sorry to have to admit, I haven't had insurance for 10 years. I can't afford it. I just can't afford it. So, I think as David said earlier, if we're really going to really make a difference, that's the one thing I think we have to jump on and make it affordable so that people don't have to sacrifice their health. Right now, I think the number that I remember hearing recently was that 33,000 Vermonters have no health insurance at all, and over 150,000 are underinsured. So if we're going to do something, let's do that. And I think we can be models for the rest of the country, as we have been on civil rights, civil unions, the abolishment of slavery, and the people in this room are just the people that I think can get this done. And I'm glad to be here. One of the other things that I think really needs to be addressed, and I would go so far as to suggest that, and it's rather radical, but the absolute abolition of opioids in the state of Vermont, either prescribing or selling. Look at what it's cost us nationally and statewide. There was a program on PBS last fall about this 15-year-old boy who got a football injury. He went into the hospital, it was a knee injury. His doctor put him on opioids for about a month, and he got out and he was hooked. He started stealing from his parents. He got hooked on heroin, and his parents did everything they could to get him clean and sober, and he was clean and sober for a year. He became a scholar or he got a scholarship to the University of Colorado. His parents brought him up there after a year of sobriety, happy and confident that, you know, he was on his way to a successful life. 4 days later, they got a call. The kid was dead from a heroin overdose. So that's another thing that we've got to do something about. Another thing that, I've introduced a bill that was born out of my preparation to run. I called Jim Culkeen, the SVSU president, and I said, if there's one thing that I can do up in Montpelier, what would it be? He said, we need to retain and attract good teachers because we're competing with Massachusetts and New York, and we can't compete. In addition to that, over the course of my campaign, I learned that there are essentially 5 critical shortages that we have, and it's doctors, physicians, assistants, nurses, teachers, and police officers. And it's not just critical, it's a crisis. It's projected by 2025, the state of Vermont will have a shortage of 7,000 nurses. 7,000. We had a witness come before our committee, and I asked him, I said, well, if nursing homes, for instance, don't have enough nurses, what happens? He said, they'll be closed. They'll close them. And what are we going to do with those people? So anyway, the bill that I've introduced in my committee, and we probably won't take it up this session, but next, is student loan interest forgiveness. It's called, what I'm calling it is a 2-for-1. For every year of student loan interest that we forgive, we get a 2-year commitment. So in other words, theoretically, for teachers and nurses who go on to get a master's degree, we get a 12-year commitment. And I'm confident that after 12 years, we got them. They're going to stay. They're going to become property owners and members of our community. And if we can get that done, I'll gladly retire from, because it'll make a structural difference in our state. Because one of the things that people look at when they decide where they're going to live is teachers, doctors. Are they good? Do they have enough? I think I'm going to close with that, but I want to tell you that on my committee, people, I enjoy them very much, and they tease me. And it started off very early in teasing me because it's been all about Bennington for me when I'm in there. And shortly after the break, I came in, and it was the very first morning, and my committee mate and the rest of my committee members all started teasing me. And I said to my seatmate, I said, you only pick on the people you like. The people you don't like, you don't talk to. And I said, Tristan, that's why I don't talk to you. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Well said. And our last speaker before we open up to Q&A is Senator Brian Campion, who's been champion for y'all down here for a few terms now, and Vice Chair of Natural Resources and Energy. So you want to talk about the environment? He's the man.
Right. Thanks, everybody. I want to thank our Lieutenant Governor. He does do a great job managing 30 individuals, all of whom can be complicated and with strong personalities. So I appreciate that he does that very well. But even more so, and on a most serious note, these conversations are incredibly important. It helps us know what is on all of your minds, and it helps David know what's on your minds. And for him to go around the state and use this office, and many times I don't think it's really used this way. It's often, it's a spot where you go in every day and you work to manage the Senate, and that's it. But the voice that he's giving to people throughout the state is not one to be underestimated, so I just want to thank him for that. I also want to thank these two wonderful new House members, and Kathleen James and Jim Carroll have been incredible. I wish when I had first been elected, I transitioned so quickly as these two have, and they really have been great, so thank you both. So I serve on Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and I serve on Senate Finance. As you know, Senate Natural Resources and Energy, we have been in the thick of PFOA work, as well as we passed out a plastic ban bag this year, and also a clean water bill. In Senate Finance, for the most part, we oversee anything, any bill that really has a fee or tax income comes to finance, as well as do tax policy for the state. So I'm here to answer questions, happy to be here, and look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
So apparently we're going to end with the legislators on that side, and our other guests who have spoken could come on up in case someone wants to ask you any questions. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's okay too, but you have some knowledge. It's okay either way. We'd like to open it up. If someone's got a specific topic, you don't have to cite it to, oh, and we have a mic out there, great, and I'm going to hand this mic to the left or right, depending on the question, who signals to me that they want to chime in on it at all. Are there any questions or topics? Sure, start over there.
Test, test.
There she comes.
This has to do essentially with climate issues and resources. So Brian, this might be and money. So it should be in your wheelhouse. The House passed a tax on fuel in order to pay for some weatherization. The Senate passed a bill about clean water without any kind of way to pay for it. So the weatherization, as I understand it, the weatherization incentive there doesn't get us very far along the road toward weatherization. And we all know that we have housing stock that's relatively old. So what price are we willing to, is the legislature willing to pay for the kinds of action that really need to take place? Where's our pain threshold, I guess, is the question that I'm going to ask.
Specifically around climate and just
And energy and clean water, particularly those three things.
So with regard to clean water, and my colleagues here and Lieutenant Governor might also want to weigh in on this, what we passed out of committee was a structure, a distribution structure basically, how to work to clean up the waters of the state. I would be shocked if the legislature closes this year without financing. It's just part of the process. The House has sent us a bill to finance, and I know that people felt discouraged when Natural Resource and Energy did not pass out a financing plan. We could have put something forward, but really that is the role of the Finance Committee. We are responsible for raising revenues of the state, and appropriations appropriates those. So I'm confident that we will leave this year with a financing plan to continue to clean up the waters of the state. And I don't want to lose sight of that because of that comment, continuing to clean up the waters of the state. We have put, as you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars. We still have a ways to go, It's not going to only take money, but it also means changing practices. And one of those practices that have to change has to do with agricultural runoff and working with farmers to make certain that their practices don't in any way harm clean water as it relates to where they're located. You know, for example, Lake Champlain, there are a number of waters up in St. Albans, a number of farms that border the lake. A lot of those, there are some that agricultural practices are infringing on the health of the lake. So it's a combination of good practices and financing. The President Pro Tem of the Senate has asked us to make climate issues a priority. I would argue even the plastic bag ban is a huge climate bill. This is a bill that gets rid of single-use plastics, straws upon request, as well as eliminates the use of polystyrens in the state. That is a huge step. When you look at the amount of energy that's used to create single-use plastic bags in this country, and 500 million plastic straws are used every day in this country, it's not only a waste issue, but it's a climate issue. So I think going forward, you'll continue to see these kinds of things. With regard to weatherization, I can't agree more. We just got the weatherization bill. I think, well, I know that there are a number of conversations happening both publicly and privately how to address it, but I can assure you it's a top priority. Hope that's helpful. Maybe not. Tell me what you're...
Well,
No, go ahead. I'm
We're gonna-
willing to listen to that.
yeah, we're not going to quite do a back and forth with
Okay,
each
fine.
one,
I think that's-
just because we do want to give everyone an opportunity. If we have time, we'll come back around. Did you also want to add something?
Yeah.
Yes.
I could talk all day about the weatherization bill, so if you want to find me afterwards, I'm happy to elaborate on that. You know, it was interesting with the weatherization bill because that the low-income weatherization program is a proven and very successful program that is and has been funded by a fuel tax for a long time. So the vote was simply to increase that penny rate. And we had a lot of pushback that that was a regressive tax. I understand that argument. I wrote a column about it recently. It is a very small regressive tax, and there were proposals about other ways to pay for that. So this gets to your question about pain. You know, what is the Vermont populace willing to do to take bold action on climate? And that weatherization bill was a close vote. And you know, some of the alternative, and you know, it's interesting as a freshman, the things that you learn. Some of the alternative proposals about other ways to fund that program were offered at the last minute. They were offered on the floor. They hadn't, I didn't feel, been properly vetted by the Ways and Means Committee, and they weren't supported by the Ways and Means Committee. So it's like, you know, are you going to vote for the least perfect way to get this program moving? If that's the bill, you know, if that's the train leaving the station, that's the vote I chose to take. Maybe we'll find a better way to fund it. But please find me afterwards. I feel very strongly about this weatherization bill. I would also encourage all of you who are interested in climate action to go to the Joint Fiscal Office webpage, find the decarbonization study, and find the RAP study. Because what they are going to tell you is that the way to make the most aggressive climate change action in Vermont is to not to put, you know, the terrifying slap a dollar on a gallon of fuel carbon tax on gas, but to put very modest incremental changes on energy, you know, on energy that then funnels that money back into weatherization and electric vehicles. And if we can, you know, if we can find the political will to enact very small taxes that then create a virtuous cycle back into those two things, because those are our two biggest emissions. Homes leaking fuel out into the atmosphere, and cars, transportation and homes. So that's where we can make progress, and I would really encourage you guys to read those studies. They're fantastic. So find me afterwards if you want to talk about that.
The
It's
other
really
thing
a hot
I would
button
just
for
add
me.
is we have to change who's in the governor's office,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
Because to go through an intellectual exercise in the Senate right now, to get 16 or 17 votes and not to be able to override a veto, this has been guaranteed to a veto. You know, so again, you have to work hard to get a leader who, and I, again, believe that our governor believes in what's happening to the climate is caused by humans, etc., but the commitment is not there.
Representative Carroll.
I just want to weigh in a little bit on weatherization. And for me, this is about neighbors helping neighbors. And on average, it's 15 bucks that the average Vermonter is paying in. And if I went to one of you as a neighbor and asked you if you could help me out with 15 bucks so that I could save $1,000 a year, I think you'd do it, wouldn't you?
You bet.
Yeah. Now, and I would return the favor. Now, under this program, it's going to be 400 homes a year.
Additional.
Yes. And on the high average, that's $1,000 a year that they're going to save. Now, multiply that on a yearly basis, that's $400,000 Vermonters are saving. And what are they going to do with that money? They're going to spend it. And for every year that structure is above ground, that $400,000 is going to go into the Vermont economy. It's important to keep that in mind.
It's also helpful with these events because you then also learn information that you can talk to your neighbors about. And one thing that I've heard from some of the folks who are opposed to this, and there's sort of two camps that are actually sort of challenged by this, the particularly strong, sort of more small p progressive minded that say this is a regressive tax. And I think Representative Kathleen James talked a little about that challenge of, well, there was another option, it didn't have the votes, it didn't pass, so then you'd not do anything for the environment. But there's also the other side of the spectrum that has said, well, this is a tax on working people, but what I want to mention for you to then have as a conversation with some of your more conservative allies out there is that there was this amendment to not put it on working people, working class people, and all of those same people who said this is really regressive and it's why I voted no, they didn't vote yes on the amendment that would have made it not be on working people. So it's very easy in politics for any one of us to give you a partial answer that appeals to that first emotional and gut reaction without really looking at the complexity. And I'm of the mindset that would have supported that amendment towards income-based, particularly on the marginal side, partly because another statistic to remember is that with the Trump tax cuts, the wealthiest Vermonters saw a couple $100 million tax break just in Vermont alone. So we were trying to, I think this raises about $4 million. So that would have been something to talk about. There was a question here, I think was next.
Hi, my name is Deanna Sham from Bennington. There's questions for each house. Has anybody done a raw straw poll, projected straw poll in regards to decreasing doctor availability of doctors and psychiatrists and dentists in the state? And I know you mentioned that there's two things, and then secondly, I want to also ask a question about the 2-for-1, back, I think 3-4 years ago, there was a vote passed at $14 an hour with a promise that the next following year that would go to 15 for designated agencies, developmental services, for home and community-based services. I was wondering if you know anything about that.
I don't know anything about that, but with respect to the shortages of doctors, those are all readily available through the Department of Labor, and it's very specific about the shortages that we have. I wish I could pull them up specifically for you, but if you go to the Department of Labor, you can find that out clearly, and it is a crisis. And that what's happening is that we don't have doctors and nurses and teachers to replace them because they're aging out, they're retiring. Go ahead.
So what would be the answer?
What's the answer? To make it more attractive for doctors and nurses and teachers to come here to Vermont with the promise that, hey, we're going to cover your student loan interest. I think for me, from what all of us, I think, have heard, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars over the life of their loans. And if it were me, I'd say, hey, you're going to save me $10,000, $20,000 over the life of my loans. That's pretty attractive and a good reason to come.
And I want to remind folks, you've got this list, so if you want to follow up I think any of us, when we get home or to the office, or there's no individual office, just so you know, nobody has individual offices at the State House except for me. I worked 18 years in the House and the Senate to get it, so don't take it from me too fast. But they, computers at the State House and so forth, then they can help find that information too. So sometimes, we are human and we don't always have all the numbers at the tip of our tongue, but you can follow up with these addresses to continue the conversation as well.
My name is Bill. I'm from the Climate Advocates of Bennington, which is part of 350.org. 350.org has provided us with this book, Drawdown. It's got 100 solutions, which has been, if we acted on every single one of these solutions, we would solve the problem. Now, I've been looking at a couple of them. I think climate change affects everything else. If we do not solve climate change, we don't have to worry about the other problems that we're dealing with. We have to solve that problem. One of the things that this particular book indicates is there's a huge amount of money to be made in solving climate change if we can figure out how to do it. Weatherization is one of them. The plastics thing is a perfect example in some ways because it is definitely related. They make all those bags out of petroleum fossil fuels, basically. So, we just passed a ban. I mean, we got interested in plastics only about 6 months ago. And the next thing you know, the legislature is acting to do that. They're acting on behalf or with the assistance of a group, which is one of the articles here, a group which is called the Vermont Retail Grocers Association, who basically said, if you're going to solve this problem, we want to do it on a state level. We want legislation that allows us to phase in. Now, just for an example, one of the solutions in this book, which represents 70 gigatons of fossil fuel, is food waste. Now, we do a certain amount of solutions around food waste, but with the assistance, with legislation and the assistance of groups that are willing to participate, like this Vermont Retail Grocers Association, who are so helpful in the plastics thing, why can't we solve food waste? Food waste, I mean, it's going to help provide, maybe not income, but it's going to provide food for people who really need it. So I'm just saying, we should really look at the economic opportunities that are available to us to solve climate change, and that will bring jobs into Vermont, bring doctors into Vermont, bring nurses, etc.
Would you be willing to stick around after the forum if people want to look at that book?
Sure.
Thanks.
Can we respond briefly? Yes.
Sure, I just want to mention that we did start requiring restaurants and others to compost. That is, we're moving in the direction of household composting. We've noticed that the composting that's been put in place has added to the food shelves throughout the state, which is, I think, it's a great first step. The other piece I want to mention on climate change is not only do we have to talk about mitigation, and I think we all are smart enough to know right now if Vermont were to go 100% renewable, which is a great goal, it still would not make a difference with regard to what's happening in this world right now. So we also have to be thinking about preparedness as it relates to storms continuing and how our state is going to be prepared to deal with these kinds of things. The other piece, and I teach a course starting tomorrow, 1-credit course, which is completely open to the public if anybody wants to come, at Bennington College, working with students, not only about mitigation and preparedness, but also about how do you educate young people? How do you start to educate the next generation around climate change, how to deal with it, how to work with it, and we're working to put together a curriculum. And it sounds like it's something that 350.org has done a lot with, so it might be something you might want to come to.
And how do they educate us?
And how they educate us.
Just to quickly add, I have that book set aside for my summer reading, my Kathleen James summer reading curriculum, and I can't wait to get started on it. When you talk about a strategy, I think that there's a really strong understanding in the Climate Solutions Caucus up in Montpelier that climate action is also a tremendous economic opportunity for this state. If you look at just the weatherization bill alone, if we find a way to pass that, I know there's going to be ongoing discussion about how to fund it, but those additional 400 homes that we would be weatherizing would create an additional 50 jobs in retrofitting those houses. So climate action equals climate economy. And we need to do a better job about getting that message out. And we need to do a better job of framing climate action so that people understand how beneficial this work is for Vermont. We're looking at a bill right now that I really hope we're able to move on next year. It's called the Global Warming Solutions Act. And should it become law, it takes Vermont's renewable energy aspirations and sets them into statute. So instead of saying we would like to be, 90% renewable by thus and thus a year, it says we will be. And I would like to see that move forward because I think it gives us a framework around which we can develop a comprehensive climate strategy. So instead of coming at it piecemeal, like let's get the weatherization bill, but there's so much more we need to be doing.
You got that on the line? Oh, Jim, go ahead. And then
I just want to weigh in a little bit about as far as the economic impact of climate change. You all familiar with hemp? Well, if you're not, go and Google it. We had witnesses come before our committee. I think arguably it's the most versatile of crops ever, next to soybean. Levi's, the jean company, are now integrating that into their cloth. You can make plastics out of it that are absolutely 100% biodegradable. And take a wild guess at what an acre of raw hemp goes for, unprocessed. $100,000 an acre. And the versatility of that product, the state of Vermont is poised to explode with this opportunity.
Thanks. I've spent a lot of my life on climate action. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. I spent a lot of my life as an adult on climate action. And recently, I've kind of changed my mind. I didn't change my mind and decide that global warming wasn't happening, but I think that the frame of carbon dioxide emissions is not helpful to us. I think if we consider thinking about climate action as about love and care for our planet, for our land, for our air, for our water, it becomes a whole lot clearer, So we're talking about clean water, and why wouldn't we, as a state, protect our waters? And when we think about our land use, why wouldn't we make sure that our land was used in a way that regenerates it, rather than takes away? And when I think about climate, it's not just about carbon, it's about people. And so weatherization is not only about saving people energy, or not only about reducing emissions, it's actually about healthier homes. It's about homes that are more comfortable to be in from day one when you get weatherized. And it's also about economic justice. The people that will be most impacted and the people that are already being most impacted by climate change impacts are those with the worst economic situations. In Brattleboro, we have a real problem with homelessness. Can you imagine what it's like to be homeless on a night where we have a really intense rainstorm? Or what it's like to be homeless on a day where the temperatures are unhealthy to be outside? Or, folks who are living on Social Security. At my work at SEVCA, a lot of the folks that I see are either on Social Security, reach up, or work a low-paid job, or some combination of all three. And those families need to be living in homes that don't cost them an arm and a leg to heat, right? But they also need to be living in homes that are comfortable and are healthy. So it's not, I think when we just talk about carbon emissions, then we lose a lot of people, right? Regardless of your political position and regardless of whether or not you even believe global warming is a thing that is worth caring about, you should care about whether or not our, least economically advantaged citizens and residents are actually living in places that are conducive to them being healthy and happy. So, thanks.
Next question. And I just want to mention, who else has questions? Raise your hand high, because my friend whose name I don't know, Lynn, is trying to keep track, and we'll try to get to everybody. So we're going to keep the questions short if we can, and we'll try to be precise in our answers as well. Go ahead, Lynn.
Hi there, my name is Logan Snow, and I'm a Bennington resident. I have been my whole life. I work full-time, 40 plus hours a week, and my husband also works 2 jobs just to, help keep us afloat. We don't have health insurance. We haven't in years. And I guess my question is for the legislators. I want to know if you are going to support the $15 an hour minimum wage. It's really important for a lot of
Yes,
people.
I voted for it last year. I've already voted for it this year. I'd like to think that the governor wouldn't veto it, but even if he were to, I'm hoping that we are able to override it. When you don't have money in your pockets and families don't have money, it's hard for them to think about environmental issues. It's hard for them to think about taking the time to recycle. Having these kind of economic means is essential. So without a doubt, yes.
Tom knows I warned him about this before I agreed to come down. The $15 minimum wage is I would say the issue that I've struggled with the most, and I just want to be totally transparent with everybody here and not try to BS anybody. It's the one issue that I've consistently heard from Manchester small business owners about. Where I am from in Manchester, I've worked for and I've owned small businesses that are operating on paper-thin margins. And so while in my heart, I very much want to vote for the minimum wage, I am concerned about some of the arguments I've seen, and I've read every study and been to every pro and con forum. I do have this lingering concern about what if the response from these small businesses is to lay off workers, is to reduce shifts. So I worry about that. I've got an appointment on Tuesday with the chair of the House General Committee. That's the committee that the bill came out of, so that I can talk to him about these worries I have. My only fear is a bill that might wind up unintentionally hurting the people that you're trying to help. And so that keeps me up a little bit at night. I'm not an economist. It's easy to read studies on both sides. So it concerns me.
In my first term as a selectman for the town of Bennington, within the first 6 months, I proposed a livable wage, and a fellow board member was in the interior page of the banner. Worst idea ever, is what he called it. I support a livable wage, and just for a little historical perspective, Henry Ford transformed the American economy by paying his workers a livable wage. Yep. When sales of the Model T started to flag, he came up with this brilliant idea: pay them more money. His fellow manufacturers of tires, Firestone, and other car parts manufacturers said, "Are you nuts?" He said, "No, we're going to put more money in their pockets so they can buy our vehicles." And that's what happens when people get more money in their pockets. They spend it locally. And all boats rise with the tide. And I understand your concern, but it's been proven over and over again, especially with low-income workers. With more money in their pockets, they spend it, and they spend it locally.
I would just add, as a small business owner, if it went to $15 an hour next year, I couldn't survive. But with steady increases that are at a rate greater than inflation, but frankly not outrageous, the virtuous cycle of going up is positive. For my business, payroll is 40% of our business. So if payroll goes up by 6%, and I sold the exact same quantity of goods, it would mean that my cost of sales would go up, a product would go up 2.4%. So that spreads the cost over a broader range of product. It's not like things are going to go up at an outrageous rate. The second piece is, I also believe I will sell more product. And so if I sell more product, my cost increase actually does not need to go up 2.4%, but can go up even a smaller percentage than that. And so I have always supported raising the minimum wage. The last piece I would say is I've seen studies that talk about reduced hours. And I posit this question to folks out there. If you're working 50 hours a week and you were able to get paid more per hour, but got paid 5 fewer hours per week, and you took home the same amount of money, would you be happier about that? Would that mean more time if you've got 2 folks earning, and I don't know if you have kids yet, but if you've got 2 different people working 50 hours a week, and you both went down to 45 hours a week, and you had kids, that's 10 more hours of combined time to raise your family and to embody them with the values and the work ethic and the community spirit that you have. And that's what we lived under, more so in those great 50s, which I have plenty of reasons they weren't great, like racist VA policies out of World War II. For those that don't know, we can talk more about that after. But as a whole, the lower wages were higher. In the 60s, they were higher, and those small businesses did survive. And that money circulated in the local economy. Now we're in a slightly different time now with the internet, but I think if you had $2 more in your pocket, you're probably not going to go buy something on Amazon. You're going to get 1 more cup of coffee at the local shop. Or you're going to get a new pair of socks for your kid. So that's, well, I only get coffee on Amazon, maybe get the socks on Amazon, but hopefully you buy it all locally. Where's the next question, Rick?
First of all, I wanted to thank all of you, legislators, Lieutenant Governor, all of those from the organizations, for this shot of optimism. To be bold in Vermont right now sounds wonderful. It really does. But my question is really for you,
Okay.
Lieutenant Governor, because I believe
I'm
you,
not taking any questions.
I believe you're probably the one person up there who probably has an idea of the tenor across the country for your like colleagues. And my worry has been, ever since the election, that we are being driven more and more to the independent states of America rather than the United States of America. And a lot of the leadership that Vermont is showing now gives me optimism. I'm very happy about it and I'm proud to be here. But what is your view of what's happening globally? Can you give us some optimism?
Sure.
Globally, nationally? I need more optimism.
Sure, I'll try to be brief. The first thing I'll say is you mentioned my like colleagues around the state. I'm not sure if there's anybody like me across the state, but no. I will tell you that the little glimpse that I have is primarily through the Lieutenant Governor's Association, which meets just a couple times a year.
Right.
And in 2018, folks that are closer to and like me won 9 seats. We had 14 non-Republicans out of all the lieutenant governors and secretaries of state in the country that were second in command. Some states don't have a lieutenant governor. We increased our numbers by 9. So, that's a 60-something% increase. And on top of that, I'm very proud to say that I am a minority in the lieutenant governors of this country at this point as a white male. The lieutenant governors who are elected across this country is the most reflective of the demographic of this country, with increased women, increased numbers of color, increased orientation, and it's very heartening. The meetings are a lot more fun this year than they were the last 2 years. So does that mean success everywhere? No. Some of those states, though, were also, the two run together, so it does mean more governors as well, but I'm not in those meetings. I heard numbers from Representative John Paul yesterday, I think across the country, 360-odd legislative seats flipped across the country in our direction. And obviously Congress was a huge swing And again, I think 2018 will be yet stronger. So I think there's room for optimism, but, and I hinted at this earlier, just because you have people that are closer to you than the person you maybe didn't want who got elected, that doesn't mean it's time to sit back and just assume it'll all go the right way. You are the resource librarians for those of us up here. I joked earlier about having an office. I have one staff person, my chief of staff of one, who coordinates everything for me across the state. These folks have no staff people. You are critical to our being able to do this job well. The organizations that are here before you are critical in providing that information and providing that support when it gets a little scary because you're hearing more from, frankly, folks who are opposed to things that people in this room support, because usually it's the opposition that's louder. So you need to be the voice, and it's not just about elections, it's about participation throughout. But yes, I do think we're moving in the right direction. I think the silver lining on the orange cloud is participation in democracy is coming up.
Thank you.
You bet.
Governor Zuckerman, I would like to hope you move in that direction this upcoming season.
Well, I'm acting governor right now, so it works just fine.
I really, all of you, I really appreciate your coming forward. But one of the things that, as far as my friend Bill here with the climate advocates, and the fact that it seems to be a little bit of a lower priority than wages and medical care. But to me, this global warming situation is way out of control, and emergency doesn't even begin to frame where we are. If any of you, I think Jeannie came to the talk that Scott Prince and Bruce Lehrman gave down here at the UU a few months ago. It's not 5 years, it's not 10 years, it's a couple of years away when we do not have an Arctic. We've got a meter left. We have a meter left of ice there at the end of September. A meter. I don't know whether you folks get this or not, but if that meter is gone, our climate goes haywire. That's why I would encourage all of you to grow a set of balls and ovaries to get this done. I'm not kidding you.
Thoughts? And this is actually the last question because we are running it in, so we'll give a last answer on this, and then I'll wrap it up, and we'll have some mingle time.
I agree. I mean, Vermont has a ways to go, but I think we're working hard on this issue. I wish Vermont could solve it, even again, and I respect Representative James' idea of putting things in statute with 90 by 50. Even if we were to make that goal, it's going to take 49 other states, China, India. We will continue to work at this without a doubt and incentivize renewable energy and continue to be what I consider to be the leaders that we are, to show other states. At the same time, we need to start to prepare for additional problems that the climate is causing. But I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need to get some community going.
Yeah.
What I would encourage you to continue to do, because it sounds like you're already doing it, is work on the grassroots. I think that you have up in Montpelier a decent, I see you shaking your head, I think that you've got a decent coalition of legislators up there who are going to be willing to take hard votes on climate bills. We took a hard vote on the weatherization bill. I never, ever thought about not voting for that bill, ever. And, the acting governor said, what issue are you willing, what issue are you willing to lose your seat for? I'm absolutely willing to lose my seat on a climate vote, no question. But the more work that you and we can do in our communities to help people understand what these votes look like, they might look like voting to raise a fuel tax. They might look like voting to raise revenues through a tax. Climate adaptation costs money. We need revenues to fund these programs. It is not free. And people need to understand that if we're going to take bold climate action, we're going to need to raise money to pay for it, and we're going to need communities that understand that these hard votes need to be taken by people like us, so that we don't, then turn around and get booted out of office 2 years from now for supporting carbon taxes. So I don't know that all the anger or all the frustration should necessarily be directed this way. We need to do major work in our communities so people understand what these programs look like.
And just to put in 2 cents to try to convince my colleague here to vote for the minimum wage, when families have more money, they are able to think about these issues and take the time and do these things. So,
The solar companies in this area can't even find solar installers. Now, come on, guys.
So, in wrapping up, I'm going to partly address your question, and I'm going to give you an answer that I think will make you slightly happier. Hold on.
In Wales, they pay $120 a gas tank. Why can't we do that here, and you guys figure out how to do it?
I haven't answered your question yet, so how do you know the answer is no?
I can't wait.
So, I am of the same party, or parties, as the supermajority. And in my newsletter 3 issues ago, and if you go to my website you can look up past issues, I pointed out that I'm disappointed with the lack of bold action around climate change. When I was first elected in 2016, it was the same night as Orange Cloud, and I went to bed around 1 o'clock in a hotel room with my wife and daughter in Burlington, and I woke up around 4:30. I don't know why, after going to bed at 1, and I just rolled over and held my daughter for about an hour in her sleep, thinking about climate change and the Supreme Court. And the last 2 years on our farm, we saw nonstop rain, June and into mid-July, and we lost thousands of pounds of food. And this summer last, it was, I know it was wetter down here, literally 100 miles apart, but it was dry as a bone up where we are, and I ran out of water, and we lost a good 35,000 pounds of our fall harvest of carrots and cabbages. So that's very real. Supreme Court consequences are very real. The tax giveaways to the wealthy are very real. And when I think about the fact that we don't have as many uber rich people in Vermont as some other states, right? But wealthy Vermonters saw a $200 plus or minus $1 million tax break on their federal taxes. I think we should grow those parts of anatomy to, it's just my job, I have to be a little more professional, being filmed. And say, all right, if we're going to put into statute goals of some numbers by some point, if there isn't a consequence to not meeting them, then we won't meet them. So if there's a consequence of we're going to be at X by Y, or else marginal tax rates are going to go up 10%, well, then maybe some of those folks who have that money are going to say, okay, it's time for me to start paying some now to implement policies and donate to groups that are going to do these things so that my taxes aren't going to go up later. Make there be a trigger in that consequence. But even more than that, we can raise those taxes now. Those folks do have that many millions more, and those millions are not trickling down. They're not adding more debts onto their back from their houses because now they have an additional $200 million on top of the other millions that they've got. And so I would argue that it's worth losing our seat to say, yeah, we're going to raise taxes on the wealthiest 2% or 5% of Vermonters and raise $50 million or $100 million and put it into weatherization or broadband. You want to talk about climate change? You install broadband, people can work from their homes and not commute. And we could attract some of these young people. Or we could pay down some of these debts, these interest debts. We can't do it all with $50 or $100 million, but if some of that is oriented towards economic stimulus that's also related to climate change or also related to bringing people into Vermont, that will help the economy have the money going forward. So I think we do need to be bold. To me, oh, apparently we're headed home. We're starting our route home. I have great and tremendous respect for Kathleen James. I think we really moved forward in the legislative district there. But if we're going to cast a hard vote that might have a consequence for legislative seats, why cast it over 4 million and not 40 million? If we're going to lose a seat, let's lose it over something big, not lose it over something small. And I don't think we're going to lose a seat in Manchester voting, and that's why she supported it. And I thank you for supporting that. But we have to convince our colleagues to go bold. Again, like I said at the beginning, these 2 years are our best 2 years we're going to have.
Yeah, use them.
Let's use them. And I want to close, this was about an economy for all. And I think it's really important to connect another dot that wasn't brought up today. Maybe it was briefly, which is mental health. We are seeing increases in individuals' challenges. And I've got to believe there's a very direct correlation between economic stress, which also leads to health care access, which leads to homelessness, which leads to, and all those end up at the same ending, which is partly mental health. It starts with poverty, and it ends with mental health. And so if someone's looking for a why is this all happening, let's look at economic justice. Let's look at raising the minimum wage. Let's look at housing affordability. Let's look at student loan debt. Let's look at access to technical schools in both high school and post-secondary so that we can have the, along with shortages in these other fields, try and find an electrician or a plumber. And how close are they to retiring? My great plumber back home retired 2 years ago. So now that's harder to find. So the fundamental problem that we have faced since Reaganomics is this downward spiral economically, and it's causing everything else that's a challenge and a cost to our society and to our government, which is your tax dollars, is from a fundamental shift in where our economy is going, which is this incredible concentration of wealth to a few. And so that's where we started. And there was a quick mention of carbon taxes. I just want to point out that my election this past fall, was the target statewide election. And between money spent against me and postcards against a number of legislators about the carbon tax, in 2016 I won by 6%. In 2018, I won by 18%. So if they attacked me on carbon tax and I won by 3 times the percentage, you always use statistics the best way you can. Apparently we're tearing down the house here. Then being bold seems to be being rewarded, right? So that's what I'm doing coming around the state, is hearing your concerns, talking about economic justice, how it flows to these other issues, and advocating for you to help us be bold and encourage us positively to be bold. And I don't know if Dan, you can do the last rap for Rights and Democracy?
Yep.
2-minute rap for Rights and Democracy. I want to thank Rights and Democracy and Planned Parenthood and Vermont Interfaith Action and all the groups that have helped co-sponsor these town halls around the state. Rights and Democracy is doing a great job organizing all of these issues. Dan?
Thank you.
So first and foremost, I appreciate you all being here. We're like 10 minutes over. You're all staying. It's amazing. I have heard over and over again from our Bennington chapter folks like Vicki and Tom and Leslie who have spoken that this is such a great place to be, and I can just see it from the crowd that came out tonight. So thank you so much for being a great audience. This is a conversation, economic justice, climate justice, healthcare justice, that Rights and Democracy is having all the time. and you are in a place where we have a really great chapter that is meeting every first and third Wednesday at the Episcopal Church, and you should join them. Come for the potluck, come for the conversation, actually take action to make these things happen. So please, if you have any questions, Tom and Vicki at the back of the room, and Lynn, who helped us out with the questions and answers, can answer your questions, can tell you all about it. We'd love to have you. I also want to make sure, I'm going to thank the panel, David.
I forgot to.
I want to thank our great MC for the night, David Zuckerman, for the day. I want to thank Paige from Planned Parenthood and Daniel from Vermont Interfaith Action for being here and sharing the work they're working on. And I really want to thank the elected officials who came, Senator Campion, Representative James, Representative Carroll. They were willing to sit up here and answer all your questions, and they were as honest as they could be, and we have to really appreciate that, so I want to make sure that people know that, you know, as Bennington people, Bennington is one of the crucial places for Raise the Wage. There are people, really good people, like Representative James, who's on the fence. And we need to bolster her and let her know that while there are small business owners who are concerned, there are workers and seniors and other people in the communities who want this to happen, right? And that it needs to happen. So we need to let her know, but we also need to make sure we let others like Representative Chris Bates from Bennington 2-1, Representative Cynthia Browning from Bennington 4, Representative Kelly Pahala from Wyndham Bennington Windsor, and Representative Laura Sibilia from Wyndham Bennington also know, because they are not on the right side of these issues right now either. And so we need to make sure that all of Bennington hears about it. We don't pick on Representative James because it is a bigger conversation. And she's willing to sit here and be honest.
We do pick on you.
She's willing to be here and be honest and have the conversation, and so it's those other folks. So you may not live in those districts, but you must have friends and family and other people, so get the word out as broad as possible. This vote's gonna happen soon. We can pass Raise the Wage. We can get enough people to override the veto. We can do that for family as well. So with your guys' help, it can be done, and thank you so much.